Hi, this 8th November, it will be 5 years since demonetization. Each and every one of us will remember the panic, despair, and the struggle all of us had to go through just because of one announcement. For many of us, it could be a distant memory, but for some, and especially the small businesses across the country, demonetization was the beginning of an end, literally. And it's been 5 years, but in this 5 years, we had demonetization, GST, and then the lockdown. And all of it cumulatively had its impact on the MSME sector, the small businesses of the country. In this context, we wanted to have this conversation with Professor Sangeeta Ghosh from JNU on the impacts demonetization had on the MSME sector and specifically the small businesses. So let us welcome Professor Sangeeta Ghosh.
The government at that point of time claimed that this is something is a pain that endured, just for a few days or months, but the gains of it would be something that would be worth the pain. So in that kind of a context, I would like to ask you, what were the immediate impacts of Notbandi on the MSME sector, and since what has been?
Well, Priya, as you have yourself said, basically the MSMEs were a heavily cash dependent, all their transactions, whether forward or backwards, were based on cash. I mean, this is something that the government knew. This is something that is recorded, documented. There is enough evidence of it, in daily life as well as in government data. So being enterprises that were dependent on cash for forward as well as backward transactions, to suddenly take away the very lubricant that oils the machine, so to say, made the economy come to a standstill. I mean, it was literally that everything overnight came to a standstill. Already something like delayed payments works for the MSMEs. So the MSMEs already suffer from a huge problem of delayed payments. So they don't receive payments from their buyers, often for, particularly in business to business transactions, for 3 months or so. And then demonetization happens and the economy doesn't have any currency to work with for months thereafter. The banks that were dispensing cash had a very tight daily limit. And even that daily limit could not be met in many cases in 2016 for months at that point of time. So all this definitely constrained the very functioning of their businesses. Already, again, the workers also suffer from delayed payments of their salaries. And they do not have the deep pockets that allows one to kind of, hold on for a certain period of time and manage, and for the survival of the very businesses, that came to like a question. To add to this, it was on 8th November. As we know, the months of November and, they follow a festive route, and then marriages often happen in that season, right? That whole period. Yeah. So a lot of demand that was expected. So there was a lot of expected demand at that point of time for many of these enterprises. And all of them were in cash. Although all of them were supposed to be in cash, historically have been in cash. So suddenly all of that just vanishes from your, spectrum, and weddings were done in much more humbler ways, than one would have expected. Generally, like whatever you buy from, also, very importantly, the other immediate impact of demonetization was whoever already had the wherewithal to have cashless transactions survived better. So again, it was an impact on the informal economy, because already the ones that are more powerful, more mightier in that sense, with digital payments, and it's not easy to transform to a digital economy overnight. So those which already had those those sale counters and everything, with digital payments facilitated, they could survive much better.
So just to push you a little bit there, like the cash available with the proprietors of small units, you essentially do not have any marked source of income, and hence it's also turned black money. Also, since these units are said to be run on illegal basis, then how do and they do not pay income tax. And these were, so then did demonetization actually help to bring out these things to the formal fold? Or
No, first of all, the biggest misconception available that just because you're an informal business, you are illegal. This is like the biggest misconception. So is the idea that the source of income is not known. The source of income is known. You are transacting, half of you are not even qualified for the income bracket that qualifies for an income tax on an individual. Most of them are not, you have an exemption annually till a certain income threshold. So most of you are not even qualified for that income tax, first of all. Secondly, you are even then paying indirect taxes on everything you consume. So whoever you are paying an indirect tax. You might not necessarily be qualifying to pay the income tax that is regulated. Your business is, if required at that point of time, was paying VAT, service charges, etc., excise duty. It was paying all those taxes anyway to the government. Many of them were not even in the tax bracket. Their products were out of the tax bracket. So this idea that it's really notorious, to brand businesses as either illegal. So what is black money? Black money is something. So so money doesn't have a color really. It's just the way it is used that makes, gives it a black or a white money thing. So this, it transfers with every transaction from black to white and white to black. It can, if, So the thing is, black money is money on which taxes have not been paid. Now, how demonetization change that color is, really not something that, it was not about really, particularly for the MSMEs and the informal economy. It was not something so on which you've not paid taxes, and so you've hoarded that money. This idea that hoarded money was, so, individuals who had saved money. Now that hoarded money is not black money. You might call me bad for not investing, but I can keep my money with myself in my, under my bed if I want to, right? So hoarded money is different from black money.
Do you think it was a one-time jolt, or was there a cascading impact given the subsequent moves of the government?
So demonetization itself, there were reports published that said that we knew that the RBI also could not furnish new currency that easily. ATMs, everything else had to be changed. It was not really easy for new currency to come out. So for months, there was not enough. The economy was functioning with less currency in circulation, first of all. So that had its impact for months. Then, when the MSME sector kind of thought that maybe, and, this was true in bigger cities, in smaller cities and rural areas, the impact was much worse because, how many, imagine the financial inclusivity in that sense, the presence of banks, the presence of these infrastructures, ATMs, etc. So there is a huge hinterland where to travel from your house to a bank itself is, kind of a lot of work, right? So in an economy like that, to overnight do this, to cancel out so much of the currency was, one would think it to be a political suicide. It just didn't turn out to be one, actually, So, and then once, MSMEs were kind of recovering, getting out of, okay, the cash came back, maybe you're just on the way to recover, and then GST was launched, which again, we know, was something that the MSMEs were not equipped to deal with. Suddenly you tell an enterprise to file thrice a month. And when GST was launched, it was like this, now there is a lot of thought that is going on with the GST Council and relaxations are happening, etc. But when it was launched, it was like you pay your taxes thrice a month. And so there are 12 into 3, 36 filings and then one annual. So 37 mandatory filings for every enterprise. Now imagine a small, and it's all digital. It's all, so you need a computer, you need a proper CA to file your taxes. Half of them in many sectors had never filed taxes. And that is not because they were illegal businesses or they had black money. They were just not needed to. Their products were not taxed in that way, and then or they paid an annual tax on their income or whatever. And now suddenly you had this 37 filings in a year. So the compliance cost suddenly increased, and it was not just the compliance cost, it was a compliance mechanism which changed, which really shook the fabric of the MSME sector, and particularly the micro enterprises. Again, the big ones survive better. They already had accountants and CAs in place. They already had a digital infrastructure in place. So they did not suffer much. It was again the smaller units which had to suddenly buy a computer. There is no space to set up like a computer space, but they had to, kind of suddenly overnight come out with, these kinds of things. And they were already, to pay a tax should be a simple thing on a business transaction. It should not be one in which, to pay a tax, you have to do so much of homework. That's not ease of doing business at all, And on the other hand, they were suffering from all sorts of supply chain disruptions, because the businesses they were with, maybe they vanished literally. Some of them closed down, some of them did not fare well. Many of these MSMEs are sole proprietorships. Many of them work without hiring a single worker, actually. They are OMEs, own account enterprises. So all of these enterprises do not have the wherewithal, do not have the knowledge of documentation, etc., which could take you, forward in this kind of a mode, in this form of progress, really. So the cascading effects were immense, and unfortunately, even as relaxations to GST, more education on GST, etc., was happening, came COVID. And that has now, the pandemic has completely, and the pandemic, the lockdown that was like induced by the pandemic, actually, that really crippled the MSME sector.
So from demonetization till now, how have we fared with respect to the supporting the MSME sector in this recovery?
So see, again, the Atmanirbhar scheme again seemed to be oblivious of ground realities. First of all, the emergency credit guarantee scheme that was launched, the loan, the credit facilitation, it was only for enterprises that already had taken a loan as of February 2020. So it was only for firms that already had enough documentation, enough system in place, and they could only borrow 20% of their outstanding loan. So the credit scheme itself was for a very limited set of enterprises who already had taken a loan. Now, they were not, demand had shrunk all over due to the lockdown. Now, in that kind of a state, they did not really want to borrow more, and then turn into NPAs. On the other hand, the firms that really needed the money, and they did not have an outstanding loan, for example, they were not even eligible. The only ones that were eligible were only people who already had a loan. So 5 months, no takers. After that also, they kept, so first the MSME sector itself was broadened. Then more sectors were added on. So hospitality, travel, tourism, hospital sector, the healthcare sector, all these sectors were added and made eligible under the scheme. And yet there were no takers. Not enough takers. Then it was, then traders and individuals were also made eligible to take this same loan of 3 lakh crore, this whole, this package. But even today, and it's October 2021, almost 1.5 years after the pandemic, and the rupees 3 lakh crores of guaranteed loans have not been used up. And this is in spite of the fact that MSMEs need the money, they need liquidity. Now, why? Because again, the historical problems of the MSMEs have not been addressed. Why is their credit leveraging potential so little? It is because they don't have enough documents to show, lack of collaterals, etc. also happens. So they chiefly go on to the informal means of borrowing money. Institutional credit is not available to them. And the other measures that were taken by the government too, whether it was an equity funding, fund of funds, or whether it was for the stress tests of the MSMEs, these are long-term measures. Right away, there is very little that this helped with. This helped the MSMEs with.
As a sector that is also employing a huge labor force, How do you think these changes have translated to?
Right. So see, first of all, is this change in definition. In the middle of a pandemic, when enterprises are incapable of an expansion, at that moment you widen the ambit. So this is the first change that the government did, which frankly, in my view, is meaningless to help these MSMEs, because already the little benefits that were there for them, particularly things like public procurement, from the government enterprise, the mandatory public procurement for micro and small enterprises. So this gives them guaranteed market access, right? Now this is being widened to a lot more larger sectors. Now these small businesses will actually have to compete with businesses that are much bigger. In ease of doing business, the whole idea for the push for digitalization, so demonetization particularly did change the mode of transaction for many businesses, because suddenly again, whether you could or could not, you suddenly had to have a digital portal to sell. So famously are those photographs of street vendors sitting with Paytm cards. So what is formalization then? Formalization then is just is nothing on the ground. It's just the fanciness of a transaction that is now digital. So if you don't know how to take a photograph with a camera properly, how can you be equipped to do like e-commerce, for example? So you have to have these things in place for a digital push. So it's kind of so what I feel is like bureaucracy and policymakers really need to be aware of these ground realities. And it's not like they are not, but instead of going for easy solutions of this and that, they have to really have a more concerted effort to, for the revival of this sector, which is extremely important. For the street vendors, the Pradhan Mantri scheme that's there, it basically gives them loans of 10,000 rupees. Now, it's a small petty sum of money, 10,000, but the government is giving that much, but it's a loan. It's not. So many of the state governments were like, we are giving 2,000 then like to people who are registered as street vendors. The government is giving a loan. So there would be a lot of people who would not want to take that loan. And there is also a huge gap between knowledge and awareness and, all of that. So to adopt to, so for example, this whole buzz around the government schemes is a push towards digitalization, is a push towards registrations, which is very good. Enterprises should be registered. That will allow you to maybe, even develop schemes, etc. Right? But the thing is that there are already pre-existing challenges of documentations. These are, that these are uneducated people, they don't have the kind of education and technical know-how. So there has to be a big mode to first facilitate that, and then the push for, online registration, etc. can come.
Looking at the demonetization and the subsequent, advertisements and the, rush towards mutual funds, and now mutual funds are back kind of a thing. Was it a punishment for the saving kind of an attitude of, South Asians or Indians for that matter? Like you always think about saving money and not necessarily investing.
Oh, no, I think it was just unaware and senseless of, it was a moment of what were they thinking,
Thank you, Dr. Sangeeta Ghosh, for your insightful answers. It was very useful. Thank you very much.